Hello, everybody. Welcome to Join Jen. My name is Jennifer Holzhauser, and thank you for joining us today. Tonight, we are going to learn about flights. We have a very special guest. This guy is like amazing. He knows all the ins and outs about flights. Incredibly amazing. Um, he's kind of pretty funny too. He's a good guy. Very knowledgeable, knows all the ins and outs about flights. I mean, if you tell him where you're flying to, he'll be like, "Oh, you're flying on American Airlines." He knows exactly what he's talking about. He's been an agent for about a year and a half now, I think. Prior to that, he has traveled literally all over the world. He books travel for very highly known professionals, and he decided he wants to do this as a career. So get the best of both worlds. Tonight, he's going to share some more of his flight knowledge with us, and he's going to teach us a thing or two at the best way to approach and book these flights. So, Ben Selly with Celebrity Travels, are you ready?
Yes, thank you for that wonderful and delightful, inspiring introduction, Jen Holzhauser. Um, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for a second round of some airline dribble, of however you want to take it. But this is a second part, technically speaking. If you joined us the first time around, which was kind of an intro to understanding a lot about airlines and so forth, there was a lot of information then. And just like what you're seeing now in the presentation in front of you, this is just information as a toolkit to you guys to help understand a lot about what the travel agency, especially with regards to flights and flying, might be useful for. Because though you're not expected to know all these terms, and by the way, there are 33 if you count them out, we're not going to go over all 33. But these are 33 top ones that a lot of people would have questions, whether it's yourself as a travel agent and or one of your clients. And knowing is all the better because you sound smarter, at least knowing what you're talking about, and at least kind of spearheading that ahead of time when your clients come at you with the same question. And before we get into all this, I just want to touch base. Last time, I do want to apologize. There's some misinformation in regards to the business side of airline corporations. If you had signed up for some of those and had issue, when I had signed up, this was years ago, and my business accounts that I have with the various airline partnerships were dated with regards to the information that they said were criteria at the time, meaning, in short, most likely if you are a travel agency registering as a travel agency, even if you have an LLC or a business number, they won't take you on as a partner. You'd have to technically be not associated in the travel industry. So if you do have another business, technically then you could apply that way. So I just wanted to clarify that point. So with American Airlines, United, and Delta, apologize, there's information on there that was a little bit more dated that I realized some people had issues on. So I just wanted to clarify that point before jumping into today's presentation, which in short is about terminology 101. I play on the words terminal because obviously terminals are at airports. Again, there are 33 words here or specifics that are laid out with an explanation and some reference points, but we're not going to go through all of them. But I do want to highlight some of the main ones that I do think a lot of you should know because for your sake, again, knowledge is power. And a lot of this is either some stuff you kind of know, weren't sure of, but I'm just going to explain some of these things because it will help you as a travel agent understand better what you're talking about, especially when it comes to flight specific. So the first one up on here is area. And whether or not you guys knew this, IATA, which is the very first, well, not the first one, but the International Association for Air Transport, has designated the world into 3 zones. And it's important to understand this because depending on where you're sending your clients, it would be considered Area 1, which is either the Western Hemisphere, Area 2, the Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and then in Area 3, Asia Pacific or Oceanic. And those are very broad terms, but it is very distinct when it comes to a lot of rules, regulations, as well as laws as per each country and the airline's host nation. But moving on from that, the booking code, which we all are familiar with, are usually 1 to 2 letters functioning as an inventory control code that specifies usually the class of service. Also called the reservation booking designator or prime booking code. It is and varies by airline, meaning the examples that I have at the end on the second sheet dictate a lot of the things that are similar when you see these booking codes, which is usually like 1 letter, 2 letters. And a lot of airlines have the same ones, but it technically could mean something different as per what it is. Their seat, whether it's a premium class, whether it's a coach or a premium coach seat, and a lot of details because a lot of airlines have extra letters that one airline won't have. But when you are looking at a category, the booking code is what exactly the airlines designate that, and it also is the price point as to what they're going to categorize it for the billing part. Moving on from that, I'm going to skip over the bulkhead because I think we know what that is, but the cache ghost availability is something that a lot of people don't understand as to why that happens. In the GDS system, which again is the global distribution system for most airlines and most corporations worldwide, it is a way of showing availability that may no longer actually exist, even though it's displayed. Why is that? As frustrating as it is common, and it just means most likely that that fare is no longer available because the systems are updated numerous times a day. That ghost or that code or fare that you see in one screen and you click on it and then suddenly it's gone, it's because it's usually gone. And that usually happens with deep discounted fares or lower fare tiers, especially in basic economy class cabins and or even a business or first class lower discounted rate cabin. So it's important to understand that it's not like, oh, something's wrong with the computer, which a lot of people assume to. It's actually, it was there. And it could have been just 5 seconds ago, 5 minutes ago, but it's no longer because someone probably bought it. And that's the end of the game for that. But it is technically a common terminology, and it's something that a lot of people get a little frustrated on, whether you're doing it for a client or a client's doing it on their own search engine. That ghost availability is why it's such an issue. And a lot of people wonder what the heck is wrong, but nothing's wrong. Moving on to Codeshare flight, which we think most of you understand, but it is operated by one airline but coded as another. An example I give there is KLM and Delta Airlines. They're both part of the SkyTeam Alliance. So if you see a flight that says Delta Airlines, but then it actually isn't KLM flights, meaning it's Codeshare. And that's something to kind of keep in mind because a lot of people kind of, if you're not familiar with airlines, look at the first ticket and think, oh, but it means one thing. But yes, it's Codeshare as per the airline. That usually is a designator for the one that actually gets the money or the funds from the actual booking. Now, when we get into fares for booking, there are several different ones to look at. And there is a slight difference there. And I think a lot of times when we think about fares, we just say, oh, if I search on there and it says this, there is usually a breakdown of either a commissionable fare, consolidated fare, or published fare. The commissionable fare, yes, the commissionable fare is pretty obvious and straightforward. It's a set rate in regards to what a commission is allowed by the airline as per the agreement with that vendor or agency. Usually it's pretty low, but it is something that comes back towards you as a client, and it actually is built into the actual rate. But then when you think about something as a consolidator fare, a lot of people get this a little mixed up because it's actually a group inclusive tour fare that's available to travel agents and other operators to certain destinations. And though it's technically a group fare, it's actually available for sale to an individual. And what that means actually for you as a travel agent, it's probably the best way to actually get a higher markup because it actually can give you the option, if it's allowed and it says consolidated fare, to actually do a higher markup and or fee on your part to make it more. And then it is actually built into the actual fare price when it shows up in the statement or credit card for your client, as opposed to a separate line saying, oh, what it is. Sometimes it's easier to do that if you're trying to make some more money, but that's one way to kind of look at what a consolidated fare is because it actually gives you the benefit of the doubt saying, hey, I can actually make some more money if you're just booking flights. But it has to be a consolidated fare, and it also has to be with one of the vendors or agencies that we're associated with that allow it, and it would specify it, but there is a difference there. And although it's not right there right now, I'm just going to jump down to the other fare mentioned, which is the published fare, which is pretty straightforward. It's everything that you would normally see on any website and or on vendor That's the published fare, and that's what most in general are seeing. The ones for the commissionable fare, not everyone is going to see that fair price. The consolidated fare is just for travel agents or associate affiliated vendors. So the consolidated fare is, again, the one that you would probably have the best chance of making more money and or markup on as far as a commission, if you want to look at it that way. Whereas a commissionable fare, it will just be built in, but it's a lower percentage. And then the published fare, it doesn't allow that. It would show as a separate line if it allows it to do so. But a published fare is, again, what you would see normally on any website and or vendor's platform. Moving on to co-terminals. I think a lot of people think, oh, hey, co-terminals, two terminals next to each other, very similar in the idea. But what that means, if you're flying to a place like JFK, it technically is a co-terminal to Newark's EWR as well as LaGuardia in the New York City area. Co-terminals means it's the same region, but it technically, when you put in NYC, if you're flying from LAX to NYC, it'll show up all those specific airports unless you designate one, which is JFK, LGA, or EWR. But that's what a co-terminal is all about. And jumping on to direct flights, speaking of that, a lot of people get this mixed up between a direct and a nonstop flight. Technically, a direct flight has a chance to actually have a stop without the passengers changing the planes. Whereas a nonstop is where you don't stop at all, and you obviously don't get off unless you're parachuting somewhere fun. But it is a nonstop flight, which is different from a direct flight. So when you are talking to your client, be sure you understand that, because sometimes on these fares, especially if it's through a third-party vendor on VAX and something, it might declare it as a direct flight. You're like, oh, nonstop. It's not necessary. You just have to make sure you read the line, because if there's more than one airport involved, most likely it's a direct flight. It just carries the same flight number, but there is a difference, because the same flight number would be the same thing on a nonstop flight, but you just don't stop. And that is the difference. You don't stop, whereas, again, the direct flight has a chance to stop, but it could also technically be a direct flight depending on how it's coded. All right. Fifth freedom flight. Now, you guys are not expected to know all these terms, but I think when it comes to knowing where airlines go, fifth freedom is simply a term of the way an airline that originates and terminates in country that is not their designated home country. What do I mean by that? The example here is Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines, obviously their home country is Singapore, but believe it or not, like a lot of other airlines, they actually have flights available that have nothing to do with Singapore. Meaning in this case, between Houston, Texas and Manchester, England, there is a nonstop flight, as well as LAX and Tokyo Narita, as well as JFK and Frankfurt. It seems odd, but this fifth freedom allows the airlines to actually have a point of sale so they could actually sell it from that country as opposed to from Singapore, for example. So that's what the fifth freedom comes in. And it clarifies itself sometimes, but not always. But that's what it is, in case it pops up as an option when you're booking for travel. We've touched on what the GDS, Global Distribution System, is before. But again, just to touch what it is, it really is what has been built in place for many years as a standard for how most tickets on airlines specific have been booked, which is usually corporate travel, utilizing the GDS systems of Apollo, WorldSpan, and some of the big ones. Again, there's examples below, but it is clear that we are in a different time period of how that is shifting to the NDC, which is a new distribution channel, and that's important to understand what that is. It's not a system; it's not a technical term for the sake of an actual built-in product. It's just a way of thinking and a mindset of how a lot of companies are trying to get to, because the NDC allows for more information when you are booking travel. And that's what is different when you are seeing it listed as an NDC flight, because that gives you more options, meaning premium economy, basic economy, first class, all these little caveats, sometimes even airline mileage partnership bonuses if you are a certain tier member. That's what NDC allows. It allows for more information to be presented, whereas the standard GDS, it's either one or the other. You want economy, here's what your price is. If you want business, here's your prices. There's no in between. This really shows the in between and everything that you don't normally see. And that's why there's a lot of pushback, because A lot of companies, especially big corporations, have been using it for years and they don't want to have to change. But we are always changing, so it's always good to know what we're looking at. Now, group bookings. I think for the most part, we understand what that is, but let's be clear. Group bookings, when it comes to flights, really comes down to about 10 plus passengers. But the difference is, I think a lot of people think, oh, booking on a group means it's going to be a low rate. Not necessarily. It's actually the average as per the number of passengers that are traveling that actually gives you that group booking rate, but it also allows you to put into one reservation basically in one place. In most cases, you're still going to find a cheaper rate if you do like 10 people individually. It's more work on your part, but if you really want to save, I would take a look at both because the group booking, again, does not necessarily mean it's going to be a lower rate. It just means it's all going to be in one reservation and in one booking code. All right. I think IATA and ICAO are pretty standard as far as understanding what that is, but there are two different organizations that are running the whole civil aviation industry worldwide. One has to do more with just the airlines specific and where they go, whereas the other agency, which is ICAO, happens to deal with specific laws and rules and regulations as per the country and regions of the world that airlines fly to. Very similar, but very different. Mileage currency is what I'm going to jump to next. And it's also known as frequent flyer miles, but it really is something that most airlines list as XXX, not to be perv. It is how they designate that code for what a mileage ticket is, which also can be obviously used for not just flights, but also hotels, cruises, even rentals. But when you see the XXX before an actual code number or an actual reservation, it means it's actually an award ticket utilizing mileage from that account of said passenger. So, you know, that does come up. Sometimes you'll see someone saying, oh, this is my ticket. You see that XXX before that code number or on the ticket number, they use their miles. So just a little heads up on there. I'm going to say open jaw is next because we already covered NDC. Open jaw. Yes, we all know how to open our mouths, but an open jaw when it comes to a flight is actually, it's a round trip ticket, but technically speaking, when one point is actually slightly different than the actual place that you fly into, meaning if you're flying to New York, so from LAX to New York, and you fly into JFK, that's great. But then there's a chance that you could also fly back to LA, but not necessarily LA. You could fly into Santa Ana. You could fly into Burbank. So if you fly into one of those other places, that's what an open jaw is. So if you ever see that term when you're booking something as an open jaw, it's still technically a round trip. It just means your point-to-point entries of the airports of inbound and outbound are slightly different. And it also might indicate a slightly cheaper price. So keep in mind, when people want a round trip ticket and you're trying to find a lower fare, an open jaw is maybe a way to look at it if you are considering a place that has multiple airports in the same area. So keep that in mind because it's a very helpful tool for a lot of people. It's like, what's open jaw? It's still technically considered by the airlines as a round trip ticket as long as it's within I think it's a 50-mile zone of the other airport that they take it to be something as a they might price it then going back to the same airport that came from and vice versa. All right. PNR code, I think most of us understand what that is, a passenger name record. It can be a combination of just letters, combination of letters and digits, but not just digits. Some airlines specify and use one or the other, but it's just something to keep in mind because it's always going to be 6. So if there's anything more than 6, it's not a PNR. And that's usually the easiest way to find someone's reservation, aside from the ticket number, which is coded as per the last conversation with 3 letters and then the number, which is usually 14 characters. We already talked about published fare, and we also know what refunds are. We all know what refunds are. But when it comes to the airline industry, the important thing to know about refunds, the airlines generally have 1 to 2 months to allow that refund to come back to whether it's you and or your client. So if people get all up in arms wondering where their refund is, it's important to understand that they have technically 60 days before you can start making noise on behalf of your client or for yourself, wondering where your money is because they do take that long and it's pretty standard practices. But with regards to refunds on airline tickets, regardless of the reason, you're never going to get it right away. unless you do have a 24-hour hold, which is usually the case with most airlines, and they'll drop it back within 7 days. But that's usually within that 24-hour period of the actual booking of a paid ticket. So keep in mind, if you already paid for it and it's a couple of days after the fact, they can issue you a refund as per the rules and regulations as to what the ticket was purchased on, but just it's planned for 1 to 2 months. For those of you who have expanded to Europe, maybe you've experienced what a Schengen Visa is. It really kind of falls under the category of 27 countries in Europe that allow, without having border control, basically in and out access and getting into a country easy. One of those countries that's not part of the Schengen is the UK. So anyone traveling would assume that, but keep in mind when you are booking for travel to Europe and they are staying there for an X amount of time, you might want to look into Schengen Visa as per what the rules state. It's allowable for most passengers that don't work or live in any part of those 27 countries permanently. But keep in mind, there are the rules and regulations on it, but it is allowed for business travel, for leisure travel, for general tourism. But it is something that helps if you know your client is going to be going to multiple countries like Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. They're all part of Schengen, and it's important they would have access and they can just easily get around as long as they show that visa stamp ahead of time. More information can be found on the Schengen website as posted there, but it is helpful to know because this, again, is just for Europe for 27 of those countries. I'm going to just jump down to static pricing because there's all these things that are kind of self-explanatory, but static pricing is when airlines pre-distribute all prices using standard tool sets. And there's up to 26 of them. And they can also be done numerous times a day. And that is why there's a lot of ghost fares, what you see and I've talked about earlier. It's because usually the static pricing is ever changing. And these usually happen for deep discounted fares. What's important to know is if you really want to get ahead of that, the best time to look for the best fares, just a little caveat for you, is at nighttime, usually between 1 to 2 a.m. is when most airlines tend to do a lot of overhaul with their booking and fares availability, when prices would actually be really low. But then a lot of times, those lowest fares are actually be taken up really quickly. Certain days of the week are better also to look into, late Monday night, Thursday, Friday nights, depending on where in the world, and if it's a domestic flight. But keep in mind, the static pricing is why fares are constantly changing, and you see availability 1 second, and the second it's gone. But it is also a lot of times tied into deep discounted fares and or really low rates that you would normally not see. So keep in mind that that's something to get ahead of if you are trying to find the best fare at a lower rate for your client. A stopover seems pretty self-explanatory, but what a stopover is, it can be technically a connection in the sense of, yes, it is a connection if you are going onwards in travel. But on domestic flights, keep in mind, the legal stopover limit is 4 hours. And though it doesn't necessarily mean you have to change planes, in most cases you do. So for 4 hours for domestic flights and 24 hours on international. The importance of knowing that is because there are a lot of rules and regulations that have been updated with TSA and so forth in the last few years. So when they say, how long was your stopover, or if there was an issue and the flight was canceled or delayed, that's when the rules and regulations start to kick in. As long as you know what that stopover is, if it falls under a domestic 4 hour or within that or longer, and the same thing with an international 24 hours within that or longer, because a lot of those rules won't apply until you actually meet the limit of the actual time frame of what each of those designated time slots are allowed. So keep that in mind. A stopover is two very separate things, but it does help to know, especially if you have a client who's stuck somewhere and you wonder what they get out of it. Should they get a hotel room overnight? Or do they get credit, some sort of compensation? You have to know what the stopover is and to also know the rules and regulations as to what you actually booked it under at the time. Because those fare categories, again, going back up to the top, would be something to kind of remind it. What is a fare code? And then what allows it? And what would you get recompensation from in a certain time frame as allowed for that ticket? The last point, I think, validating airline carrier is really the designated airline that gets the ticketed reservation and the money from it. Going back from what we said earlier, I think with regards to the validating carrier, it is the kind of airline that actually takes over usually in a kind of a codeshare flight, it is usually the first one. Not always, but usually a validating airline is the first one, whether it's on a domestic or international ticket. So keep in mind, if they ask which is a validating carrier, it means who's getting the money. And in most cases, which is the first airline that they're going to be flying on if they're doing multiple connections. So now that we've kind of gone through some of the basic dribble, which I know is not as exciting, but definitely helpful. If Jennifer, my lovely assistant, could scroll down to the second page. Yes. These fair basic code basis code examples are simple. The one on the left side, this big grid, kind of encompasses a lot of travel agencies, vendors, and airlines, but even car rentals and so forth. These are not standard in regards to what you'd think is. There's a lot of companies, especially airlines, switch it up. But that's kind of where they kind of gauge what they categorize a fare code on, especially for airlines for their flight category and seating preference. On the right side, I pointed out American, United, and Delta's breakdown of how they actually, fare codes for themselves. You're not expected to learn all this. But if you really want and you are booking a lot in a specific airline, the big three in the United States, again, American, Delta, and United, this is how they categorize their fares. And they are similar, but there's a lot of differences because not every airline is going to utilize a premium economy seat, for example, and or have several, in case of American, 4 categories of business. And you'd think B would be for business, but oh no, it's not. It's actually basic economy on American's case. So you really have to understand when the fare rules and regulations that you have are set in place as per the ticket that you purchase, that fare code is dictated by what exactly that class is, the value of the ticket, and the rules and regulations that accompany that when it regards to making changes, modifications, or adding on flights for that matter. But each airline, as you can see, they kind of spell it out differently. And some of them actually do double digits, like United has PN and PZ on their premium class business. So it's not always going to be the same, even though you'd think it would be. But again, it's really depending on the airline and the class of cabin that the actual passenger is booked on. So again, kind of just a helpful tool, and nobody's expected to know all these. Most people who understand the GDS system would have a good understanding and have a handle on it. But for you, I think what really benefits you as the travel agent is having something to go to and check off really quickly. What does that mean? And something like this, because you can Google all this information anywhere on the internet. But what I'm realizing too, just as a travel agent myself, there's no one source for a lot of this information for a lot of the main stuff that you should know. And a lot of this here, though there's a lot more to it, kind of should help you be a lot more comfortable with terminology when it comes to airlines and booking fares, especially in this ever-changing industry. And I think for what it comes down to, it's a very helpful tool to say, hey, at least now I don't have to keep scrambling and going to that lesson or going into that webinar to find information that really, though it is, again, available all over the internet, can easily be in one place like this grid, which I think for you guys would be a helpful tool to keep at your side pocket if you want, for that matter, or on your desktop somewhere, because when it comes up, and more often than not, it will, this is a great go-to. So, what are we on time? I've been jabbering for what, 30 minutes? Jen,
Yes,
are you there?
30 minutes. Yeah, I'm here. We're doing great on time. If you want to, if you want to break for questions, or if you want to
Yeah,
continue on, it's up to
let's
you.
do questions, because I'm pretty sure people are like, what the heck was he talking about? I just woke up again. And that's totally understood. A lot of this stuff is blah, but good blah.
If you excuse me, if you have questions and you want to type them in the chat box, go ahead. Or if you want to unmute yourself and ask, go ahead, do that as well. I do have a question though. With that first page, we talked about the Codeshare. Was it the Codeshare flight, I think? Or the co-terminals?
Yeah.
Because I've noticed before where like you're flying into JFK and then it leaves out of LGA. Is that what that means?
Yeah, because unless you're paying attention to it, and if you put in, for example, in your search bar when you are actually doing the booking and you just put NYC, it's going to cover all three because there's an airport code for, yes, obviously JFK, LGA, and EWR. But if you put NYC, it's going to look in all those unless you specify the specific airport. And that's what the code terminals is. You have to understand that unless you're specific, sometimes even for LAX, we have Santa Ana, we have Burbank, Long Beach Airport. Those are technically all part of the system. So unless you say LAX as opposed to Los Angeles Airport, you're going to get all of them, and it's not going to specify unless you're paying attention to those details. That's what it means.
Okay. And then if it does do that, that airport shuttles you over to the other airport, correct?
Not necessarily. It's also dependent on the airlines. Some will do that, but usually it is the case when it involves an international flight on the connection, if that makes sense. And it's not always the case, but for example, there are people who do fly into Long Beach, and if they are partnered with a certain airline that's flying to Asia later that night, that airline might very well offer that service to connect an actual shuttle them from Long Beach Airport to LAX to make that connection flight. But it's not always the case.
Perfect. All right. Let me see. Do we have to learn any of the GDS systems? Ritz, we technically book directly through the airline itself, like through the vendors itself. Um, I don't, so no, you don't have to learn any of the GDS systems.
Can I just add to that though?
Yes, you can.
Though you don't need to know it, any system that you use, whether you're booking flights with part of a package deal, whether it's on VAX or Pleasant Holidays or some other company that offers the whole tour plus flights, they're utilizing a GDS system, believe it or not, because that's still the standard in regards to how the booking is when it comes to those package deals. They're getting the GDS rate, but what is listed on their end. So they're already affiliated with the GDS system. They're just putting in a package deal for you. You don't have to know that, but knowing the terminology that goes with it is what the GDS actually doesn't always show. And that's why the NDC, meaning, hey, is there a premium economy available or basic economy? That's what NDC would show. Whereas the GDS is all, it's just economy and nothing else. Business first. Does that clarify that point? I don't know if it helps, but they do have a GDS system if you are booking something through them. And if they say it's NDC, it means they're utilizing, there's going to be several options for that ticket.
Does everybody know? Yes, awesome, Ritz. Does everybody know what the NDC code means? Because I noticed that a lot. I know, I mean, we talked about this a few months ago, but I want newer agents to hit on this too. When you're booking through VAX or Vacation Express or whatever, it'll say an NDC fare. Does everybody know what that means, or do you want Ben to kind of hit on that for a second? I'm waiting for answers. Unless
What
Ben, if
happened
you,
in music?
yep, I'm seeing yes, please. Can you explain, please, please, please? Yes. So Ben, if you want to go into NDC, that would be
Fine.
great. Kind of
All right.
a short version of it.
Right. So in place, as per what we mentioned earlier, GDS has been a standard for many years. But since, the late 2000s, NDC, which actually stands for New Distribution Capability, again, is a new idea of handling information. When you book on GDS systems, they just say business first economy, sometimes basic economy, but that's it. There's really no wiggle room. There's no really other fair options. NDC is what the airlines would prefer most corporations would go through because it gives them the expanded knowledge to the customer directly, which in case those are the agents, to see what's all available. Meaning, is there a premium economy? Is there benefits for those with a certain tier on the membership of the airline? Is there access to lounges? Do they have extra bags? All those fly under the NDC, idea. Whereas the GDS, it's just the fare. NDC allows for more information to be shared with the client agents and is more accessible and it's ideal. It's just the pushback is because companies have been using the GDS systems for so long, it's trying to meld the two together to make it a lot more commonplace and easy because My point is, if you go search online to any airline website or Expedia as just a normal customer, you're going to see all kinds of options, right? You're going to see everything that's available in regards to all the tiers of flights, tickets, all these things that you get if you buy a certain ticket. Whereas that's exactly what they want everyone to see when it comes to travel agents or when you're sharing information to the client, because all they're seeing or getting is a GDS system breakdown, not the full package deal of what is the big picture, shall we say, of everything available. And that's why airlines, when you look at their website nowadays, they list everything. They're doing the NDC. It's the new, distribution capability. They're giving the customer more information because they know if the customer goes to a corporate booking agency, they're only going to get business, first, or coach. That's it. Nothing else. And that's the difference. Knowing the difference is more information on the NDC idea as opposed to the GDS system that's been in place. And there's more than just 5 as listed on the bottom, but those big ones are the ones that have been dominating the industry for so many years, but very limited information. If you're still confused, I know, which it is probably a little confusing to most people, it is something that you might start seeing pop up. But the NDC fare, if it says NDC, it usually means it's going to show more options on that same flight, but a little price difference, a price more for this. If you wanted an extra bag, you can add that. Again, that's what NDC is. It's giving more information to the customer, to the client directly without just only these. It's more over less.
So does NDC affect us travel agents directly?
It does and it doesn't. It does if you're booking a lot of flights, because the big thing for travel agents is you want to be able to give your client as much option in regards to what's going to make him feel more comfortable. Because if you just say there's first and coach, that's a pretty given. But sometimes, like I said, if they have membership with United Airlines Mileage Plus program, and they're a certain member, they're a premium platinum, they actually would get this. And that's what NDC lists at. And so to know what NDC would show is a helpful tool for you, because then it gives you more option to give to your client to say, hey, that's even better. And kind of is incentivization to say, let's book it. Because if I fly on that flight, not only do I get lounge access, I get extra bags, I get someone else to come in with me, as opposed to, oh, we just got, what does it come with? Well, you might get a meal, but that's pretty standard with regards to what the GDS system shows. There's more information on NDC, and it is something that would affect if you're booking a lot and or have clients who are very picky and like, well, what do I get for that buck, bang for my buck? It's like, well, this is what it is. But NDC, which again, it's not an actual system, it's the mindset of how they want to inform the customer with more information and options for the same flight, that just GDS would be very, very cold on sharing.
Perfect. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or about any of these codes, how to make commissions when booking travel? I don't know if we really want to get into that when booking flights, making commissions on flights only.
Right. And that's a whole other.
Yeah, that's a whole nother training. And I really don't want to get into it unless you really know flights.
Exactly. But I think if there's anything to learn from all this information is not necessarily what you need to know. It's just very helpful. And there's so much jimble jamble jargon that comes in just airline terminology that I know confuses people, because it's so easy to say, even for the example of a direct flight and a nonstop flight. There is a difference, and it might not affect you most cases, but then there's that one chance the customer's like, well, why am I stopping here? And then they're all pissed at you because you didn't read the fine line that it says it's a direct flight, not a nonstop. And there is a difference.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to stop recording. Is that all you have right now, Ben, for us?
Yeah, I mean, when I was just my closing thoughts this, when I was thinking about what to say, I think really comes down to there's so much stuff that even a seasoned traveler or a travel agent would never know. And this again, there's way more than just this. But in short, this is a lot of stuff that keeps coming up a lot of times. And I think it is a helpful tool to really kind of be open-minded to the idea that in this ever-changing and evolving travel industry of ours, especially the airline industry, unless you're paying attention to the details, one moment it's going to be one thing and the next moment it's going to be something else. But that's why having the basics of what to look for is key, because that will help get you a lot more, not only credible, but, have more faith in yourself as far as booking and what to look at and how to answer a question, which a lot of times you don't think they're going to ask. Most likely will come up at some point, doing this, because a lot of the stuff that's somehow kind of wiggles into the conversation. But it's a good tool to have, at least for this document. But that's all.
There is a question here. I don't understand the difference between nonstop and direct still.
Okay. Just to go back to it, a nonstop flight is what exactly it is. 2 points again. I'll just use LAX to JFK. If there's a nonstop flight that says nonstop or NS, sometimes they code it to that. It means it does not stop. A direct flight to JFK could very well have a stop in St. Louis, Atlanta. It just the difference there is that you stop, but also the airline number stays the same. And that's key, because on a nonstop, obviously, it's just the same number. But on the direct flight, if it does stop, and if, for example, stops in Atlanta and it's flight 67, it's still flight 67 on the connection from Atlanta to JFK.
So
that's the difference.
So basically, you don't get off the plane and change planes. You're sitting there. You're stopped in that airport. You stay on the plane and then you continue on.
And usually that's the case. Sometimes, though, they do pick up additional passengers, but it is something that they do allow people to get off. But that's the difference, because a direct flight means if that stop is built in there, people can get off and they can just pay for that purchase of that flight from, example, LA to Atlanta. But then they can also just pick up passengers who are just booking from Atlanta to JFK. But for those who started in LA, it's still the same flight number all the way through. The flight number does not change, but you do have a stop, whereas a nonstop, no stop, and obviously the flight stays the same.
all right, perfect. So I think we're going to stop recording. We can do more Q&A afterwards. But thank you, Ben, so much for your time. This has truly been helpful. And
Has it?
yes, it has. All right.